Thank you all so much for tuning in for this conscious conversation. I think this is our second one this week, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Anyways, we're here. We're welcoming Dr. Jessica Byrd-Olmstead back to join us today to talk about recovery and well-being in 2020. I'm super excited. But before we get into the topic and everything like that, I just want to check in with you guys and see how you're doing. Jessica, you want to start?
Oh, we're doing a
Yeah, we're doing a check-in.
You know, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling fairly good. Little nerves as always. This is my second time on, so thank you for that. And yeah, I think I'm just feeling excited, and it is kind of a fun Friday.
Awesome. TJ, how about you?
I am really grateful today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. And like, you are two of my favorite people. And, both of you, one of the things I love about each of you individually and now collectively is that we can, get a cup of coffee and talk for hours. So everyone watching, today is going to be a 5-hour episode. I hope you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready.
It's a marathon.
Awesome. Okay. So in talking about well-being and recovery in 2020, a few things come to mind for me. And I think the first thing is just adapting our recovery to what's going on right now. I mean, I know for me personally, it's been, TJ and I have talked about this a few times where, the two of us are in long-term recovery, and I don't want to speak for TJ, but for me, it has been really difficult to try and continue my usual recovery routines in a very unusual time. And so I'm wondering, Jessica, if you had some insight on what recovery and well-being are looking like right now. What can people do to adapt to these ever-changing and always difficult times?
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing about that, Jeremy. And, this is something, TJ and I have had many talks about recovery and what that looks like. But I think now, specific to the times that we're living through, just like everything else has changed, meaning the way we work, the way we parent, the way we socialize, so is recovery. And when I say recovery, I'm thinking more specifically to, people who are in recovery from substance use specifically, but that could be recovery from a lot of things, right? And so I think right now, just as so many of our areas of life are challenged, is with our routines for recovery too, especially like you mentioned, being in I want to focus in maybe on long-term recovery for a minute. People who attend 12-step groups or other support groups in the community. And I think anyone who is part of one of those 12-step groups knows that the social connection is huge. And for many people, that's their foundation, right? And so I've often heard people refer to the meeting or the group or the connection with others being the higher power. And now I'm taking a step back and going, wow, that's such a shift. Now being in, perhaps people are going to virtual meetings or having Zoom calls or video calls with their 12-step sponsor. And even perhaps power dynamics changing because, their sponsor that they once went to, for their own needs is also going through and living through this public health crisis as we all are. So I think, thinking about recovery from that sense, I think there's a big shift in routine as far as folks who do take a 12-step route or community meeting route. I also just want to acknowledge that it's hard. And what I'm seeing a lot of, and I'd love to get into this, is we don't have our normal, call it coping skills or call it distractions. I think sometimes even healthy coping can still distract from what's going on internally. So the way I've been talking about this is, and I mentioned, I think last time I was on, this kind of forced retreat, where things that perhaps we haven't thought about in years or since our early recovery or since, even things coming up from decades ago are starting to bubble up as we are having to turn inwards. And so I think there's challenge in that, but I also think there's a lot of wonderful possibilities. So I'll be curious to hear what the both of you think about that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's interesting to kind of continue on what you just said, Jessica, and also what we talked about last time is that, my mind no longer works so much in black and white and good and bad and right and wrong, right? So I'm always curious, that all the possibilities of a situation, but I also want to be careful not to bypass that this is really difficult for a lot of people, myself included. I am a very social being. I love hugs. I love connection. I love long conversations with people in person. All that support seemingly went away. I know, at least intellectually, that's not true, but there's still that part of me that really yearns for the hugs and for the connection. So I always want to start by saying whatever I'm feeling, whatever you're feeling, whatever anyone who's watching it now is feeling is perfectly acceptable and appropriate, because I have spent a lot of years living in some sort of version of, oh, I shouldn't really feel that way, or I shouldn't really think this, right? And so regardless of what's happening, I think the opportunity here is to be present with ourselves, to allow ourselves to feel. And then, as Jessica said, there are so many opportunities in the midst of this. Some of the most painful experiences in my life have turned out to be some of the most rewarding. It doesn't mean it's fun going through it. I've had definitely some challenging times, and most of the time for me, those difficult times involved me not being able to feel as connected, connected to my community, connected to the people I love and care about. I think the opportunity here, regardless of how it feels or even what I think about it, is this idea, or this almost like we're forced to slow down. Right now, I can continue to resist that. Jessica, you talked about coping strategies, brilliant strategies, distractions, whatever they are. We can still distract ourselves. It's pretty easy, right? There's Netflix, there's all the different things we can do. But I do think that this is a time where there's a huge opportunity to really look within and ask yourself, what do you really want in your life? And, I get to practice what I preach, and that is, life isn't as much what happens, but more about what we call it and how we respond and how we live in it and with it, dancing with life. I don't think any of us saw this coming, maybe on some level, but this is definitely, and I certainly thought, this might happen for a few weeks, but certainly not as long as it has. And of course, we don't really know when things are going to get back to whatever normal is going to look like. So for me, it's really about honoring my emotions, honoring whatever I'm feeling is perfectly appropriate, reach out for support. And, for me too, it's like, when in doubt, check in with someone and see how they're doing. We could go into the statistics of the suicide rates going up and addiction rates going up, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And I know that that is very true. And as Jeremy said, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I feel pretty stable, and I've had some really rough days in the midst of this, some really rough moments in the midst of this. So I think self-love and compassion is like the most important starting place.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. And I think reversely, or not reversely, but maybe just another perspective with that is that what I've seen in recovery communities and even people outside of recovery communities is this almost awakening to
Mm,
the things that exist within us that maybe we haven't
yeah.
looked at in a long time. And so for me, I know personally that's been the case where these memories have been coming back from early childhood, adolescence, and and a lot of them are really pleasant memories. A lot of them are really good, and that's been really fun to be like, oh yeah, that's right, like wow. And at the same time, there have been a lot that are really painful. And I've been in conversation with a few people at meetings and just over the weekends and stuff where they're like, yeah, Jeremy, it's weird. Like you hear people say, do your work and self work and all these things all the time. And I think that's what I was doing. And now I've kind of realized maybe I haven't been doing that at all. And all of a sudden these things are coming to the surface. And so what I've seen is that as we embrace this kind of stillness, especially those first 2 months of the shelter in place, it was this beautiful opportunity to be with the things that maybe we didn't recognize because we're zipping and zapping throughout the day. And that can be really scary for people, I think. And so I'm kind of curious from both of you, if people are newer in recovery or new in this kind of self-exploration phase, I think it's really hard to be like, okay, I'll be with what is, and I'll love myself, and I feel like what I feel is perfect, and that's okay. I think that can be really hard to hear sometimes. And so I'm wondering what maybe we could offer as some comfort or relief, or not like a how-to, but what could we offer people that are maybe having a difficult time with that experience?
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for bringing that up. And I think it's, in one sense, it feels so easy to say, like, self-love, self-compassion. I talk about it all the time. And even, as a therapist, as a human, I still struggle with that myself, right? What does that really mean? I also love it when people say, also in the recovery community, oh, just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
We should have an entire conversation on that sometime.
Yeah, we should.
But I think I mentioned last time I spoke with you about empathy as an action. I also feel like, how can we look at self-love and self-compassion as an action? Because I think for folks, whether you're new in recovery or new to this self-exploration process, as you mentioned, and you have some really, unpleasant feelings or memories bubbling up, it might not feel accessible to say, oh, just love yourself anyways, or it's okay, right? It might just not feel accessible. So for me, it's again, how can we look at self-love as an action? And it's really going back to some ideas, and they talk about this in 12-step community, but back to the basics. Right? It's like, I'll get back to the basics. Well, what does that mean? It means that I can practice self-love through small actions. And even if it might seem insignificant, like, and this relates more to the physical body, but things like, eating a healthy breakfast, going to bed or going to sleep on time. These are things that seem, I think, in so many ways we take for granted going through our human experience. But when things get really rough, they're also it's like a gift to ourselves. And I have to remind myself of that. And I remember I'm in long-term recovery as well. And I remember hearing very, very early on in a group, and it was in a meeting actually, that, just make your bed. And if all you do is make your bed for the day, that's a success. And that has stayed with me, over, 15 plus years later. And that I was just telling a group of other colleagues on a meeting yesterday, if you took a nap today and that's all you did, I think we are doing collectively a wonderful job as leaders in the community. Take a nap. I think that's an act of self-love. And so again, bringing it back to, it's hard to think ourselves out of these negative thoughts sometimes. It's hard to have the same voice that's maybe perhaps telling us negative things, trying to use that same voice to get us out of it can feel futile, right? It's like, no, we're not going to do that. So it's about getting into some other place. So it's a bit of a tip, but I think it's more so just looking at, what are some just really foundational things that we can do to show ourselves self-love rather than telling ourselves that we love ourselves or that it's okay or have compassion.
I love that. And as you're talking, Jessica, I was thinking I had the honor of facilitating a 2-day workshop with clients yesterday and the day before, and finally in person. It was so rich for me and so incredibly grateful. And I was reminded of how me personally, and a lot of the clients that I have worked with, and a lot of the people I know in early recovery, it's really easy sometimes to look at recovery tools as a way out of something, right? So like, I'm feeling this, it's too intense, let me figure out something to do. So if you're 12 step, it's like, let me work on my steps so I don't have to feel this. Or as Jessica said, let me let it go, right? Well, what does let it go mean? But for me, sometimes my mind likes really simple. And so one simple framework that works really well for me is, if addiction is numbing feelings or running from feelings, then recovery is about learning how to be present with them. Right? Because a lot of times it's really, we can have these different tools and it might be subtle, but it might be also really, really important to understand that the greatest gift I can offer myself, whether I'm in early recovery or just starting on a spiritual journey, or maybe I've gone through a transformational period of my life, learning how to be present with what is and leaning into it, I think is the most powerful recovery tool, because so many of us have been programmed to get rid of, right? So we have this idea that this is a negative emotion. So one thing that's important for me to recognize is there's no such thing as a negative emotion. Emotions are quite neutral, but it's my thought about them. And the addictive thought is, how do I get rid of this? So sometimes we discover strategies to get out of the emotion. And I understand that. As a matter of fact, sometimes that's the best I can do. Let me change the channel. Let me keep moving. Let me do something. But what I think we're talking about on a deeper level is, let me see if I can just be present with this. One of the tools that Jeremy and I often use is very, very simple. And that is, what would I be feeling without the story? Because I love what you said, Jessica. If I have a long history of this critical self-talk, the answer is not mental to the issue that is mental, right? So that's why sometimes you hear the answer is spiritual in nature, but has nothing to do with the problem, right? So I don't fix what feels broken intellectually only. That's a part of the equation. But ultimately, for me, it's like, let me be present with what I'm actually experiencing and see if I can do it without going into a good, bad, right, wrong story.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. And I think it's really practical, just as something to just be with, is the thought of, not trying to find a way out of something, but rather a way to just be with something and to honor it. And I think that, yeah, like sometimes, like you mentioned, changing the channel may be the best we can do. And I think that's perfectly okay, while also knowing that while we are in an intense emotion or an intense mind state, if we can do our best to be with it and honor it and watch it and try and learn from it, or just even just be with it. I think for me, like when I think about, I used to get really bad anxiety when I was flying, right? Like I'd been in some crazy flights when I was young, and like in thunderstorms, and it was like, and so even 20 years later on a, flight from Santa Cruz to LA, I'd be like, kind of anxious. And I noticed the more I tried to get out of my anxiety, the worse it got. And when I started learning these principles of, welcoming an emotion and just being with it, letting it exist, it was still there, but it wasn't there as long. And it was like, hey, yeah, you're just, this seat next to me is my anxiety, and we're going to fly to LA together. Right. And that really did help a lot. And I also think, Jessica, one thing that you mentioned that I really liked, that really resonated with me, is like those kind of like micro goals, right? Where it's like, I was experiencing some really intense family stuff over the weekend, and I found myself almost frozen. Like there was so much to do and so many emotions and so much to think about and solve, that I ended up just kind of paralyzed by it. It was too much in one moment, and I kind of blocked up. And so I said, okay, today I'm going to spend 5 minutes in the silence. That's all. I'm just 5 minutes. If that's all I do today, then hey, I did it, And I think one thing that I've noticed with people in recovery during these times is that they're almost trying to manage this time like any other time. And when they're not hitting those goals, or when it doesn't feel like a normal day, it feels almost like a failure, or like they're failing themselves. Then I think that that's really important, is just being gentle and saying, hey, like, let's make our bed today. And that's good, you know? Yeah, for sure.
I love that, Jeremy. And I want to just self-disclose here. I'm a fearful flyer. I've identified as a fearful flyer most of my life. I do fly with a stuffed animal who I refer to as my flight companion. So I appreciate that example.
Oh yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. When our emotions, and also to your point, TJ, it's not good or bad. It is data. They're trying to tell us something. And when we ignore them, they go somewhere, right? They either get pushed away, or sometimes they get louder. And so for me, it's looking at when I look at my emotions specifically, what is my relationship to them and what are they trying to tell me? I want to listen to them. And if it's, oh, you're scared right now, I really, again, what you said, Jeremy, I love the word you used. I want to honor that. Because just in honoring that emotion, as I'm looking at that fear and going, oh, you're trying to protect me right now, right? You are trying to help give me some information about something I might need to do. Maybe that's an old record, though, an old tape that used to work, right? We use those terms often in the recovery community. But I still want to honor where it's coming from. And just by doing that, it can ease the energy level around it, which I think is so important. The other thing that you touched on, Jeremy, which is you're seeing a lot of people trying to go through their day-to-day lives like they normally would without a global pandemic upon us. And I've done that as well. Not only what I'd like to do is I also like to let my perfectionism creep in, and actually, I should have written like 10 books by now, right? It's been 4 months. What have I done, right? I mean, I should have been so much further along. So that's a little sharing of my internal voice that likes to mess with me. But it's going those, I love the term that you used, micro goals. That if that's all I did was that 5 minutes in silence, that was an act of self-love, and noticing how did that shift my experience. Maybe it didn't change what was ever going on externally with family or friends or whatever, because there's always something. But how did it shift the experience? I like to talk about with the relationship self to self, right? How did that change? Because for me, that is when I notice my perspective on whatever the external circumstance changes. Because again, I'll go back to, I can do what I can. I can do my part with the larger public health crisis. And I'm pretty aware of my limitations, unfortunately, because I'd love to just come in with a magic wand, like most things in life, and, have it be over, as I believe we all would. Mm-hmm. But also realizing, coming back to, it's that serenity prayer. What can I control in my life? Mm-hmm. And the truth is I often hear people say, well, I can control myself and my actions and behavior. And I actually think that's also true to a point. Yeah. I think that even has its limitations, because it's like going, oh, I didn't really want that thought to come along, or that memory. Guess I'm not controlling that dream. And just circling back really quickly, I just want to touch on those memories that you talked about. I think that's happening for a lot of people, myself included. Also, looking at relapse, this could be a tough time for folks specifically in recovery from substance use around relapse right now. And so I really want to acknowledge that too, that I might be experiencing some suffering and these things might suddenly feel like a good idea again. And so that's something I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on as well.
Well, I love what you're saying because a wise person once said, I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am responsible for what I do with it. And I love that, right? Because I agree, how much am I really in control of what comes up in my mind, right? And that tape, that narrative as it shows up. I think the fundamental difference for me today is I used to not be aware of it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was happening. I accepted what I was thinking as the ultimate reality, or even as the truth at all. And as I've continued to explore, I've recognized that my thoughts are something I have. It's not who I am. And if it's something I have, then it's not permanent or changeless. So, one of the ways that I work with thoughts, because I used to work with thoughts like this: why do I keep thinking that way? Oh my God, I'm so negative. Shouldn't I be finished by now? Or I would go, shut up, shut up, shut up. That's the way I used to meditate. It was real fun too, by the way. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Be peaceful. Inner silence, inner peace now, right? So like I had this relationship with self that was pretty brutal, and I didn't know it. And so the first step for me is awareness and being aware of the thoughts, and then I can start to question them. And for me, that's where the power is. It's not so much in getting rid of them. As a matter of fact, I can do that internally and externally, right? So if I'm scrolling on social media, my mind will have an opinion about every picture and every post. And I was really thinking one day that was going to go away. But I have discovered, and some of you may be far more enlightened than I, but for me, I notice my mind is opinionating. The difference is I recognize now that my thoughts aren't solid. My thoughts are constantly moving. And when I can become the observer of them, when I can witness those thoughts and become curious about them, then I can start to question them. And my favorite one is this: where did I get that idea? What do I experience when I believe it? Uh, I have a formula that I've created and I want to share it. I don't think we shared this on the last show, but it's this little 4-step process that's really practical, and it's something that has had profound effect in my life. We were talking about anxiety, so I'll use that as an example. A lot of times we say, I feel anxious. So I want to start by asking myself, is anxiety a feeling? Right? Is it a physical sensation? Is it a thought? Is it a feeling? What I want to explore is the possibility that it is a strategy, not a conscious one. I doubt any of us wake up and say, oh, I hope today is super anxious. I hope today I'm just riddled with anxiety. So it's not conscious. As Jessica said, and Jeremy, I think you mentioned this too, it might just be a lifelong pattern that I'm not aware of. The anxiety is trying to manage something. So here's my quick 4-step process. 1, gratitude. Totally counterintuitive for a lot of us. Thank you, anxiety. I know you're trying to help me right now. Or it could be, thank you, depression. I know you're trying to help me right now. Or it could be, thank you, judgment. I know you're trying to help me right now. So step 1 is gratitude. Step 2 is asking the question, in what way does this serve me? Because so often we go into, how is that not working for you anymore, right? That's the aggressive relationship. Let's crush it. Let's let it go. Let's get rid of it. But let's start with gratitude and looking at all the ways it serves me, or I believe it's serving me, or has served me throughout my life. Then the third step, step 3, is in what ways has it not served me? And then just to be aware of how it feels, what I think, what I notice as I'm playing with those 3. And then the final one is, after getting all that out, I ask myself, what do I truly want? What do I really want? And then usually what I really want isn't really being served by whatever the strategy is. So then I can just be curious about it. I think it's Eckhart Tolle says that when we recognize illusion as illusion, it begins to dissolve. So when I recognize anxiety, not from I've got to get rid of this, but Jessica, I love that you said there might be some information here. Feelings are an internal navigation system. When I put my finger on a hot stove, it hurts because I need to take my finger out or I'm going to burn it off, right? So a gentle relationship with myself and that 4-step process has really helped me because, I think as Jeremy said, it's not about getting rid of the anxiety. It's really about learning how to be present with it And as I said, start with gratitude, start with the curiosity about all the ways it has served me, then look at how it's not serving me, and then get in touch with what I really want.
And I just wanted to add that 4-step process, I think, is really applicable to when something in our recovery is activating, when we feel that urge, or, you know, the thoughts start to come into play again of, well, you know, like we're in this shelter in place, you know, if someone's really at the receiving end of all the fear from the media and social media and everything like that, it's real easy. I could very easily conjure up a story as to why it's okay for me to go drink. You know, nobody would know right now. I mean, this is a global pandemic. Like, of course, like it's fine if I could use it. You know, I can just see all those stories that could come into play, and so for me in recovery, for you know, in terms of the relapse thing that Jessica brought up, I think that 4-step process TJ mentioned is a really good place to start. I also think that for me, I've treated my recovery differently during these times because they are different times. And I think what I recognized very early, and I've been kind of realizing every day, is that like I can't just coast through like I usually do. I can't turn on autopilot real quick and trust that it'll get me to where I need to go. And I think before the pandemic and the shelter in place, there to a degree, I was on autopilot. I knew that I'd wake up, I'd go to work, I'd come home, I'd watch Netflix, I'd go to bed. You know, it was and there's a lot of comfort and security in that autopilot, but that same autopilot is not going to get me there during different times. And so what I've had to do is really recognize the importance of self-care in terms of like this isn't some luxury. It's not like I'm treating myself. This is survival. This is how I survive. I have to take care of myself. And that means setting boundaries with work. You know, a lot of people that are working from home now, they're working way more because there's no commute. There's no going to the break room and coming back. There's no turning off your desk phone, right? Like you're at your computer all day. And so the amount of hours, work hours, I feel has gone up with the stress and everything else. So I think, anyways, not to ramble on, but I think really giving this weird time in our lives the respect of being different, and recognizing that we have to adapt our recovery plan accordingly, and really being relentless with taking care of ourselves, I think is huge. So that's what I'd say.
Well, I appreciate that. And I didn't see that as a ramble at all. It reminded me of so many things. And, you know, I think I quoted him last time. Adam Grant is a wonderful psychologist focused on career in the workplace. And I just saw a quote from him that we're working 10 to 20% more. Mm-hmm. Our days are 10 to 20% longer each day. And that absolutely wears on people. And that is part of our recovery process. And I think setting boundaries is an act of self-love, right? I mean, and I think, again, this is such a unique, I don't know if unique is the right word. This is such an unparalleled time in history that it's like all those tools in our toolbox that we've had over the years from recovery. It's like, all right, it's go time. Ready to be assertive. Okay, you've been working on that. Now we got to do it. Right. So it's, in a sense, it's this internal call to action of all of these things that have been accumulated. And instead of being on, like you mentioned, Jeremy, that autopilot, it's now moved, I think, for so many of us into this, I like the term TJ used, awakening. But with any awakening or spiritual growth, there are growing pains. And so I liken it to, I'm trained formally as a child psychologist years back, but it's like a toddler, right? When they're first learning to walk, it is not graceful. And so even for myself, some of my own tools are rusty. I have them. I just maybe haven't looked at them in the same way for many years. And so now taking them back out again and trying to incorporate them back into my life, it hasn't been, even for myself personally, quite as graceful. But then bringing back in that self-compassion, one of the things that it's really served me, I think, in my life in general, is holding things lightly. And so not so much using humor even as a way to deflect or a defense, but really just to hold it lightly and watching myself and my actions, my thoughts and behavior, and going, well, there, that just happened, right? Whatever it was, whatever, kind of, I don't even want to call it a mess up, but whatever opportunities I had throughout the day to take notice of, it is amplified. It's absolutely amplified. And for me, I've seen, not only for myself, but for others, there's an increased intensity around it, like a magnifying glass of growth, right? And so there is, I think, some wonderful opportunities for joy in that. And I also think that it's hard. But I don't even know if it would be in the realm of possibilities to stay in that complacency. I mean, I guess it could, but I also see that could also lead to some longer term suffering, right? So when we look at, just to throw in some little research here, when we look at people who have traumatic events in their lives, those who have some of the outcomes that we don't see as great are those who don't experience it in the moment, but rather push it off till later. And I think, in a sense, we are all collectively experiencing something that could be considered, I think, by many traumatic. We're experiencing it in the moment. And so it's all shades of emotion, right? And so for me, that's a gift. I feel grateful that I can experience all of these shades, varied shades of emotion, however difficult, in this moment. Because my fear would be, if I didn't, and I tried to let it go, whatever, I think for me, letting things go is like eating some ice cream instead, right? Which is fine too, depending on the day. But I would be worried for my future self. I would have concern for myself at that point. So I think what I often tell people, and now I feel like I'm rambling, if you don't feel good right now, that's great. Do you know why? Because you are living in reality. And if we take a look at reality, there's some really difficult things going on. If you came to me and you were, ecstatic and over the moon right now, I'd have some curiosity around that. I'd wonder. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I would be more curious about that, because I think part of living in reality is, again, experiencing the entire spectrum of emotion and thought without judgment. Going back to what TJ said, without judgment.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so important. What a powerful and important message, because what we know about a traumatic event is our body goes into survival, right? And our body does, our mind does, our spirit does, our emotions do, and that's either fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah. And I have seen a lot of people, or a lot of people have expressed to me that they have felt frozen right now, like either maybe disoriented, which means I'm not quite in my body, or what day is it? Or I just noticed that all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock and where did that time go? These are all survival strategies, and they're put in place to help us survive. The issue, though, and what Jessica's talking about that's so important is if I just stay in that freeze or in that fight, right? Because, the other approach is crush it, dominate, right? And that's, Jeremy and I talk about that, a lot of times in our culture. Especially, I'm just going to say, and this is not a judgment, maybe it is, but especially millennials, crush it, dominate, go, work harder. And that's a fine paradigm, except right now, that might not be the way for us to actually be present with what is, because I hope what you heard Jessica say, it's really, really important. If not now, when, right? So if I'm not able to be present with myself now, what happens to those emotions? What happens to that trauma? That's why when we have collective trauma, like something horrific that happens like war or the Holocaust or something really, 9/11, the AIDS crisis, a lot of times collectively we freeze, right? Collectively we either get frozen or maybe we run away from it. And again, all of those are strategies for survival. They're not bad. And if I can be aware of them and recognize, oh, look, I'm kind of numb right now, and then observe that numbness and then be curious. And what curious looks like for me, and I think this is the greatest act of self-love, I wonder what I might be feeling if I wasn't experiencing numbness right now. I wonder if I can get in touch with the sensation that's happening within me. And I laughed, Jessica, when you said, and look at it without judgment. So for me, it's like, look at it, recognize my judgment, and then question that judgment, right? Because yes, oh my gosh, like Krishnamurti, the highest form of human intelligence is to see ourselves without judgment. But I often judge my experience, right? My mind is, this is good, this is bad, I must get rid of this, I must have more of that. And of course, that's suffering. The Buddhists have said that for 2,500 years, clinging to what I want more of and averting from what I want less of is the definition of suffering. So maybe the greatest, we could do a whole show on boundaries. What I am going to say about it is this for me. The boundary, if I'm going to use that word, is really for me. It's not about anybody else. And I was feeling a little moment of maybe a little tinge of guilt as you were saying, we're working more, because I'm not working more. I want to be working more because that's my strategy. Workaholism and go, 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 go. Jessica's is getting degrees. That's her strategy. She's like, let me get another degree, which I appreciate. But it's like this go, go, go. And mine is the, why didn't I, write my next book? Well, and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I did just finish my third book during this. So anyway, you can hear that my strategy is often to stay really busy. So if I can observe that and slow down, and that would be, if I would use the word boundary, it's like, oh, let me not go beyond this line, because when I do that, I recognize I'm not really in touch with what's happening. And that's how we create PTSD later, right? We're not able to feel what's happening right now. And I know that's slightly simplistic, but the more I can be present with what is now, the less I'm going to bury it, run from it. And then it's not going to be the same later as if if I wasn't feeling it or addressing it, it's not going anywhere. It's still going to be there and it's going to show up later.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Jessica, something that you said that I noted down was kind of holding things in a playful way. Yeah. I think that's been huge. When the whole pandemic first started, it's like there's so much fear and anger and anxiety, and whether or not all that stuff aside, and where it's coming from and why, I don't want to get into that. But what I recognized early was that I needed to kind of counterbalance that with laughter. And so, and even with myself, I mean, one of my strategies is to, take myself way too seriously. Like this is a serious thing. I have to be serious right now. And then I'll ask myself, well, according to who, and like, for what reason, And so for me, one thing that I do is like, recognizing where my boiling point is, both in my recovery and just professionally, and setting boundaries around that, but also being playful with that, right? Like, I had somebody call me at 8:45 last night for work stuff. And I'm like, don't you know that I set a boundary? And they laughed and, oh my God, Jeremy, I'm so sorry. I'm like, thank you. Call me tomorrow, but it's like, it's just holding it a little more playfully so that I don't snap into the, oh my God, why is this person calling me? It's 8:45 at night, And so I think that has just kind of helped maintain this, this way of balancing all the emotions from the news and current events and politics and racism and all that stuff. It's like, it's okay to tend to those things, to be active in those things, and also be over here laughing about something else. And I think that that's something maybe that may not be a super popular opinion, but to me, it's like these things that are happening, both COVID-19 and the racism, for example, it's like, they're very serious things and I'm very serious about them. But that doesn't mean that I have to be that way exclusively. And if I deviate from that, it doesn't mean that I'm not active enough. It doesn't mean that I'm not doing my part. It just means that I'm taking care of myself, and we need to laugh sometimes. And so I think that that's super important.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jeremy. I'm going to tell you guys this, and now I won't be sending you any videos. I want to make that clear, but I want to preface this before I share this. But early on, when shelter in place happened, I started filming myself dancing to MC Hammer. Okay. And I think it's pretty good. I think they're, I don't know if I'm going to go viral, but I started just sending those randomly to friends. And and I needed that. And again, if anyone wants to take that as a tip, but what I want to attach that to is look at all the people on TikTok. There's been this huge surge in things in different parts of social media that are a little bit lighter. And because, like you said, the social justice issues going on, hugely important. The public health crisis, that we are living and breathing that every moment. But that is not all of who we are. And it's about connecting to all of our humanity and not denying parts of that. And I heard years ago at a training, and this is really helpful for me, even in my own recovery, because I think about identities a lot. And I was really into this idea of like, what is a recovery identity? And for me, for so many years, and, I talk about this quite a bit, but there was still a shame element even associated with me being in recovery, because it meant that there was still this stigma. And I remember being at this training, and this woman, I think she was a psychologist, was at the VA. And she said, people in recovery were like multifaceted diamonds. And I think that just really stayed with me, is that, yeah, I have this side of me that, I go to meetings and I'm, active with my sponsor. I have another side of me at the time that was in graduate school. I have another side of me that's a friend. I have another side that's a family member. I do, public policy and advocacy work. Those are all me. And so I think, again, going back and honoring, I love that word. I'm taking that from you, Jeremy. And going back and honoring that side of you that we need play, right? And within that, to me, it's not just play. And I talk about this, again, my work, having been trained working with children and families, is I think as adults, we lose sight of that. And one of my hopes is that through this shelter in place and, all of the suffering that we see going on around us, that we can, it may sound cliche, but connect to those younger parts of ourself again. Because that is the fun. That is the joy to me. And I'm going to steal this from Esther Perel. Okay. Shout out to her. She's the best. But I need vitality in my life. And when she talks about vitality, she talks about connecting through others through play and novelty. And I think we need that now more than ever. So I'm going to keep making my MC Hammer video. I need to get on it, actually. And, if I make a TikTok account, I'll let you both know. You'll be the first. But I think that needs to be valued. I think that needs to be up there with all these other aspects of our identity, and that it's okay.
Yeah, and I love that too, because earlier I was going to also bring that up as we're talking about learning how to be present with ourselves and leaning into the emotion. Sometimes that emotion is joy. Sometimes that emotion is happiness, and it can cut both ways, right? Like I can equally want to push away what I consider to be a negative emotion, like those things that are sad or anger, or, and maybe we call them uncomfortable. Maybe we have different words for them rather than negative or positive. But when I'm feeling joy and I'm feeling happy, it could be really easy to go to, oh, I shouldn't. There's so much going on in the world. I shouldn't be, right? I shouldn't be happy. I shouldn't feel peaceful. I shouldn't be in joy. And so that goes back to whatever you're feeling is perfectly okay. And not only okay, but it has information, as Jessica said. I wonder what this emotion is wanting to show me. And maybe it's wanting to show me, my gosh, lighten up a little bit and have some play in your life, have some, authentic connection. I mean, I think there is a reason that TikTok is surging right now. And not only because, as the young people say, all the old people found out about TikTok, darn it, COVID, right? I never knew what TikTok was before, so I'll put myself in that camp. But there is something that can also, there is space for that as well, because we're not, one-dimensional beings. And we do have a full range of an experience, physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And what if I just was able to become curious about everything happening in my life and move to the best of my ability out of judgment and into curiosity? That alone is life-changing. I wonder what's happening for me right now. I wonder what's happening in the world. I was going to take us into a whole conversation about information bias, but I know we don't have time. So I'll just leave that as a little teaser, and who knows, maybe there'll be a part 3.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we'll schedule that for the next one,
Sure.
Yeah, because I'd be really curious to talk about that. And I think something you both touched on that really resonates with me is being able to really live the full human experience and honor what comes up. And Jessica, by the way, I totally stole that from TJ. So
there you go.
There it is. But I think, I think that the other thing that TJ mentioned that's so important is that, I mean, I know there are people in my circle that are just thriving right now, that, they're for whatever reason and however it's happening, they are doing really, really well personally and professionally, and maybe really needed this time out to do this work, and they're thriving in this work. And so I think what TJ said about, if it's joy, that's okay too. I think that's really important, because a few of them I'm like, how you doing? And they're like, Jeremy, I don't even want to like say this, but I'm doing really well. And I'm like, dude, that's amazing. Why wouldn't you want to say that? But we've seen it when we share good news on social media, sometimes it's met with contention. And so I think, just to reiterate again, that it's okay to embrace and honor what experience that is, I think is huge. But as we wrap up, I can't believe we only have 5 minutes left. But I was just curious if you guys had any final thoughts on recovery and well-being in 2020.
Well, it's so funny now thinking out the term well-being, because I think what's going to stick with me from this is now it's going to be well-being with what is. So I'm going to add TJ's twist onto what well-being is. So it's well-being with what is. And I think so much of this, where this discussion has gone, which I think is wonderful, which is, again, whatever is coming up for you is okay. And I think that's so important. And we are also dynamic creatures. I always like to talk about humans like we are mammals. We are still mammals, right? We are animals, but we are also have these other like social and spiritual experiences, which are also so important. To round it out, I think just continuing to honor all aspects of your experience and know that you can have all of these different feelings happening at once. You can feel angry about what's happening right now. You can feel sad. All of that is okay while feeling joy. They are not mutually exclusive. Feelings are not in a mutually exclusive state. You can feel them all at the same time. Whoever wants to come into the party, right? So it's it's all there, and it's all part of that human experience. So I will end with that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jessica. TJ, how about you?
Well, I love that, Jessica, because, it took me, and I'm just going to be transparent. It took me a long time in recovery to realize I could have more than one feeling at once. I thought I was either happy or I was sad. I was either angry or I was at peace, right? And then there was a point when I'm like, oh, wow, there are a lot of different experiences that can happen at the same moment. So I really love that you brought that to the conversation. And, I just want to close by saying, if no one's told you today, you're a whole and perfect spiritual being, because it's really easy to forget sometimes with everything happening in the world and maybe in your individual life. Fear activates all sorts of absurd strategies, at least it does for me. So if I can honor the fear and remember that there's a place within me that's unharmed and unharmable, and there's a place within me that is safe no matter what. And that's also while also honoring and recognizing that everything that else that's happening outside of me and, my mind, because my mind does what it does, to welcome all of that. And then to also remember, essentially, I'm a whole and perfect spiritual being.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you both so much. My only final thought is really just gratitude for these conversations. Jessica, thank you so much for coming back. I think we should definitely come back for a third, make it a trilogy. To everybody watching, there's a lot of ways to spend your Fridays. So I'm really grateful that you spent a little bit of it with us. I hope that these reflections are helpful. And, let us know in the comments if there's something you want to hear us talk about too. That's the other thing. And, I know at least I think all three of us are down to kind of riff on whatever. So, but yeah, thank you again, Jessica. Thank you, TJ. And to everybody watching, take care. And we will see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.